Hello, hello.
Hello. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. How about yourself?
Yeah, doing well.
You have a good break, good holidays?
Yes, it was wonderful. I appreciated the time to kind of like disconnect. It was very nice. How about you?
Oh, agreed. Completely the same. It was very relaxing, very quiet this year. It was nice.
I love it.
Richard would join, but he has to go on an on-base meeting. But I think he'll be on the next one.
Cool. Sounds great. All right, we'll kick this off in just a minute. Cool. Well, I'll get started. Start running through just kind of key points. We're all, I think, returning from holidays. With that, kind of touching on where we left off before the holidays, where we're at, where we're trying to plan. I think kind of this is a key point of planning for us to figure out exactly what to focus on and what really I think is going to resonate with, kind of the ecosystem, the end users, and anybody who is looking at Lula to try and say, like, is this a potential solution to one of probably many problems that organizations face. So with that said, welcome everyone. Today is January 6th, 2025. This is the Lula community meeting. It is being recorded so that we can post it later to the Lula-dev YouTube channel. If you need to see any of the previous meetings, go ahead and see the link at the top that I think we put in here somewhere. Maybe not. Noted. I need to add a link for that. Yeah, that or I'm blind. But we do have the YouTube where we record the meetings. That said, if you would like to, please add your name to the attendees list. Please add any items, questions, concerns to the Q&A section. We'll definitely want to go ahead and hit those. Otherwise, week over week, we've been iterating. We expect this meeting to change a little bit more here in the coming weeks, but nonetheless, like to keep this flexible, like to keep it open, but want to bring people more into the fold of, what are we thinking about? What are we planning for? What do we want to go and try to accomplish? That way, we're not kind of making all these decisions in a silo, and that they're not a surprise, but also that people can have opinions. With that, I think the real big thing that I wanted to hit was just a review of the last release, review 0.14.0. Just to talk about the key points there. I think there were some, as like a really big release as for kind of a bunch of different things that I believe are important, with kind of telling some of the story about where we're headed. We'll hit some of those in the roadmap planning, but nonetheless, you can find the release and all the changes on the Lula GitHub repository. Some of the major callouts that I'm going to run through here are going to be, things like SSP generation. We've kind of been building up to that. The changes to the OPA domain, OPA provider, not domain. Reporting as for things that we'll talk about as well for a roadmap, and then kind of towards the validation piece is trying to enhance kind of that overall piece of the puzzle for provenance. Like, how do people trust that what you say is supposed to happen is actually going to happen? We talked about some of that before, but I think it's always good to try to revisit some of that. And then we made some bug fixes type stuff. Some of them I would say are less bug fixy, but more like trying to find the most provenant way to display the information. And so I could probably go hunt down a good example. But in the assessment results, there's all findings have a status and then like a reason and a bunch of other metadata associated with it that we weren't using in the past. We had some PRs come across that changed that so that it was available. This is great. It adds one more piece of information that we could query and search for, that we could add to reporting. Otherwise, what's neat about this is kind of just continuing to challenge, hey, I think this is the best way to use this field. Let's go ahead and let's try. And then from there, let's continue to iterate. And so if somebody sees a better place to put something or a piece of data, add data, remove data, I think all of that is very, very much still fair game. More so if you talk to like some of the OSCAL developers about what you can and can't do. And there's a lot that I would say, maybe the best way to word that, there isn't a lot that you can't do with OSCAL. That would be like breaking the rules outside of just very blatantly misusing something. So lots of room for freedom. Just to hit some of those items, all of these updates very much wanted to find some wanting to ensure we get documentation created for them, as well as start to update and provide more tutorial walkthrough based items for these things in the future. But system security plan generation calls out kind of what do you need, profiles. There's a big story to tell here about Lula really transitioning from being very component definition catalog focused to now bigger picture OSCAL, anybody's OSCAL, not just people who have Lula or have used Lula previously. What can we do with it? How do we use it? What does it do? And so this is one where it starts to drive into more coordinating this full orchestra of, you need a profile. The profile needs some required stuff. They all need to kind of resolve together to tell a story. And so when you're doing this, you need a profile. Optionally, you need component definitions to start this security plan, this system security plan generation. And then other pieces of information that, can help kind of start to form the SSP into something meaningful for end users. There's a lot of things that we still don't have anywhere to pull context from. And so in the kind of development area around that, we've started marking things like we're just going to say like, hey, this is a area that needs more refinement. And I just blew this up and then lost my spot, but there's a markers in there for like, hey, this is a to-do item. You should probably look at it and fill it in with some information right now manually. In the future, maybe with more of a user-friendly workflow. On top of that, these importing custom OPA modules for the OPA policies, I think is a pretty exciting one when you think about, again, the full orchestra of one OSCAL file, many OSCAL files, all with Lula validations. Each of those has a policy. Each of those has policies that may do the same things or use some of the same logic. Why copy and paste that across all of them? Why not provide a structure where you could reuse OPA modules. And so this is now a part of the validation spec where you can say, hey, I have OPA modules that I want to use. I've written them as separate standalone modules, and now I want to import them so that I can use them accordingly. So if that's of interest to you, please go take a look at the documentation that's under validation reference providers. But I think as we start to tell the bigger story of, again, many component definitions across using many catalogs, using many profiles, like when you really want to tell a meaningful story, I think it's going to get pretty crazy with all the wiring that needs to happen. And so it's going to be, I think, really important just continue to find these ways where we can prevent the need to duplicate some data in order to reuse it. So that was another big piece. And then over to the testing part, we had tests Lula-dev, validate, and you could run your tests. Lula-dev validate, run tests. That was something we added to a previous release, and then in this latest release, getting over to Lula validate. And so Lula-dev validate would have been one validation. And you want to test that validation in isolation. You get quick feedback loops. That's wonderful. But then when you do a Lula validate and run the tests, now you're thinking about OSCAL. This OSCAL component definition could have 1 to 100, 1,000 validations in it. Each of those have their own tests. Each of them have their own permutations of the individual tests you can run to say, here's a known fail, this is a known, like these are both known fail. Or I guess pass, result not satisfied. Nonetheless, they each have many different test results or tests that you want to run against that data. You can do this against live environments, just like you do with Lula Validate, or if you had your resources, we could pass those in. But nonetheless, the overarching collection here of run all the tests against all of the stuff, just like I would in, I'd say, series with the validate that's being performed. So all in all, very exciting stuff. One of the things that we took from, I'm going to pause there actually. Review 0.14.0. Any questions, comments, concerns?
I don't have any questions right now, but I know we're really interested in trying out the SSP generation. So I'm sure once we start playing with that, we'll have more questions. But this is awesome stuff so far, you guys. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate it. And then from there, I wanted to make sure to follow up on this one from December 16th. It was a while ago. But roadmap discussion, again, we're trying to formalize exactly what are the things we're going to work on. Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 gets a little bit fuzzy because, we learn new things every day and priorities change accordingly. But nonetheless, starting to put some ideas down for, what does this look like? Who's it meaningful for? Who are those different personas? I.e. somebody who is consuming Lula as a library. It's probably a little different than somebody who, might benefit from some translation logic or reporting. All these things are tied together. All these things need to kind of, work in the full, spectrum of how does Lula operate? How do we do things well? But nonetheless, I'd say some of our team focus is to keep hitting at this. And so I'd say we'll probably have an update for the community meeting next week. That's very likely, but these were some of the items that we called out. And so if any of these stand out to you as pique your interest or you have a question, one, feel free to bring it up here, but two, feel free to leave comments, throughout the week. We can more than revisit those because these are some of them a continuance of trying to make our way through the full OSCAL workflow and life cycle, and it's a lot of work. I think we've only begun to recognize how many different ways with which you might want to try to get some data from one area to another. Where is it relevant? Where is it not? But then some of the adding the additional pieces that like Lula adds on top of this. And so from a composed package perspective, anybody can write OSCAL. There's nothing stopping you, and people very much should be reviewing OSCAL to see if it fits kind of in their strategy for their organization and how they do things. But I think that there's like a layer of, and not just me, I don't want to certainly take credit. These are not solely my ideas, very much team effort here. But when we think about like, how do we collect things? How do we make it easier to collect things? How do we make it easier to transfer things and pass them off? Who's that useful for? Those are different personas as well. We've been looking at packaging. We've been looking at reporting. The people who are writing OSCAL, may have the knowledge necessary to read it and understand what's happening. There may be others who kind of just want the, single pane. What does this all mean to me? And that's something that we've seen even, internal to some of the efforts we've been working on, but, it pass fail. If I'm looking at an assessment results file, it's not clear unless you go through line by line, finding by finding, and say how many passed, how many failed. That takes time. How could we start to allow for reporting on things that are meaningful to people who don't want to dig through each of them, maybe don't understand the OSCAL down to its every single piece of information, as well as the Lula complexity on top of that. So reporting I think is a great one. Translation, I think, is going to be something that can make Lula more advantageous to the DoD in particular, but then also other domains where they each have kind of their own way that they could very much use this format, but at the end of the day, they need to submit it in a different format. We've seen this for, things like other systems that require different ways of uploading information if and when they have it. So thinking about those things, console, and wanting to keep parity with the CLI, Lula as a library, something that we talked about at the last meeting, was enhancing what that looks like and improving upon that, additional domains, infrastructure. And then I think we've been trying to refine a variety of other ideas into something that is more understandable across the ecosystem. And so expect updates on those. But nonetheless, I'll add action item to follow up next week and revisit these. Any questions on those items? Any of them that pique interest or stand out? Wonderful. With that, kind of hitting Q&A section available, talk through anything and hang around. Otherwise, we mentioned for those who don't have anything or want to move on to something else, feel free to drop at this time. Otherwise, yeah, I'll hang around for a little bit and answer any questions.
I do need to drop for now, but thank you so much. Like I said, we'll probably have more questions next week as we're messing around more with the SSP.
Wonderful. Love it.
Have a great afternoon. Bye, guys.
Likewise. See ya. All right. Thanks all.
Bye. See you later.